everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is all about all of the books that I read in January. Welcome to my January wrap-up. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and today we're going to be talking all about the ones that I read in January. And in January I read a grand total of 16 books. 2 of those were audiobooks and 2 of them were actually ebooks, which is quite unusual for me. So I read 12 physical books, and about half of those were from the Giant TBR, but more on that later. From those, 2 were rereads and 2 were newish releases, which meets my goal of reading some new releases every month. And I participated in the Past and Future Readathon all month, which was run by Emily at Novell Novels and Gemma at Read a Book Gem. And I really enjoyed this, and I managed to check off all of the 8 prompts. In terms of the stats, I've been trying out Storygraph in January, and I did the page challenge where you had to record some pages every day. So I recorded the pages that I read each day, and it tells me on there that I read a grand total of 4,732 pages in January, so that seems like quite a lot. So today I thought I would go through the books with you roughly in order of how much I enjoyed them, and I've put them roughly into my categories again. And this month the categories are kind of okay, bordering on good, and very good, and favourites of the month. So it's been a good reading month, definitely overall. Some of the books I will say a bit less about than others because I've already included them in my first wrap-up of the month. So if you'd like to go and see that, I will leave a link for that down below, so you can find out more about the books that were in that one. So the first book I'm going to talk about was the first book that I read in the month, which was Private Keep Out by Gwen Grant. This was a children's classic, but not a very well known one, and I read this because it was mentioned in Lucy Mangan's book Bookworm, which you know I loved last year. And this was a library book, which is why I don't have it here to show you anymore. And the good thing about it was relatively enjoyable, but I was expecting it to be funny and I was disappointed not to find it more funny. And the second book in my okay/good category is The Last Precinct by Patricia Cornwell, which is actually the last book I read in the month. So this is roughly about the 11th book in the Kay Scarpetta series, and when I started it I was quite concerned that I might have to have a big old unhaul of all of the rest of this series, because I do have at least 6 of these books still on my shelf to read. And I wondered, after unhauling Kathy Reichs last year, whether I would still actually enjoy the Kay Scarpetta series. And I did find some of the same faults in this that I was starting to find with the Kathy Reichs series, but I do overall still like this series quite a lot. I prefer the characters to the Bones series, but this definitely wasn't the best of the 11 that I've read so far. There are far better books in the series. Very little seemed to actually happen in this one, and it's lucky that I kind of care about the characters, because if I didn't, the book wouldn't have had a huge amount going for it. But it does eventually get into its stride and have a bit of a storyline. I just felt a bit neither here nor there about this book. It was fine, it kept me turning the pages, and it did have a lot of pages, 565. I do think this book in particular didn't actually need 565 pages. It could have comfortably been 400 pages, and I'm sure none of what was cut would have been missed. So that was my main complaint about it, but the main good thing about it was that it did enough to make me want to keep reading the series, so there we go. Moving on into my very good category, the first book in there is the graphic novel of And Then There Were None. I've put this into very good because I didn't enjoy it as much as the book itself, but it is a very good graphic novel with very nice artwork, and I will undoubtedly read it again, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. Also in the very good category, I would put Treasure Island. Thinking back on the month, I have now not forgotten this, but I hadn't remembered that it was this month that I'd read it. I did really enjoy this at the time, and thinking back on it, it definitely was a very good book, but I don't think it had enough storyline for it to get into my favourites of the month. But it's still a really, really good read. The next book I've already mentioned in another video as well, and that was a graphic novel, The Walking Dead Volume 2, Miles Behind Us. This is by Robert Kirkman, Charlie Adlard and Cliff Rathburn, and I read this on the Libby app, borrowed from the library, so that was another library book, and yeah, very good. We'll definitely be continuing that series. Next we come to the New York trilogy by Paul Auster. I said in my middle of the month wrap up that I needed to think about this book some more to decide what I thought of it, but actually in the time since I haven't thought about it very much, which is a bit disappointing because I did think it was a book that was going to stick with me, but it hasn't really. So this is definitely a very good read. I don't feel any less confused about any of the things that I was confused about in it before, and I haven't spent an awful lot of time thinking about it. I probably will keep this and maybe read it again one day, but yeah, it wasn't a favourite of the month. Another book in the crime series that I've been reading was Rather Be the Devil by Ian Rankin. This is something like maybe the 21st Rebus book in Ian Rankin's series, and John Rebus is a former detective in this one. He is currently retired, but he can't help getting himself involved with cold cases and also with current cases in this one. So this was a good read. Again, I wouldn't say it was one of my favourites in the series it comes in. There are better Rebus books. There are also worse Rebus books probably. This one wasn't my favourite, but it was a good read and gripping. I just didn't feel that this one maybe had as much going for it in the storyline as others do, but I still found it very good. And the next book in the very good category, and this is getting towards the stage where I almost could have called these books favourites of the month. We have House of Correction by Nikki French. I read this in one day, even though it is over 500 pages, and it's a really enjoyable book. I did mention this in my review of the other Nikki French book that I read this month, The Unheard, but in brief, this is about a woman called Tabitha who has gone to prison accused of murdering one of her neighbours, whose dead body was found in her shed. Unfortunately, because she's been in a very bad state mentally and has been very, very depressed, she doesn't actually remember the day in question, the day when she's supposed to have murdered this man. She's pretty sure she didn't murder him, but the day is a bit of a blur, so she can't really easily defend herself. But this goes through her time in prison and her time in the courtroom as she tries to find out what really happened that day. It's a great book, highly recommend it. This is one of the earliest books I read in the month, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Possibly could have put this into favourites of the month, but I think because I read it first, I've forgotten it a little bit, but it is a really, really good book. I highly recommend this if you like books with sort of unlikable protagonists that are maybe more like an antagonist, and if you liked the film The Talented Mr. Ripley, this is even better. So yeah, I would recommend this one, and I will look out for the other Ripley books that Patricia Highsmith wrote. Final book in my very good category, and almost edging it into the favourites of the month, is The Odyssey by Homer. Again, the same as with the Iliad, there were things I loved about it and things that I didn't love about it. I really enjoyed reading this with the Eclectic Bookclub, which is run by Shelley and David, and I'll link their channels down below. We read this one book a day like we did with the Iliad, and yeah, I was expecting to enjoy this a lot more than the Iliad because I already knew that I had enjoyed aspects of Odysseus' story in a cartoon when I was younger. But yeah, there were parts of it I really, really enjoyed. But there were also parts of it that I thought went on a little bit too long, such as when Odysseus is in disguise. I do think that that was a necessary plot device and I see why it was done, but I felt like that bit went on for a tiny bit too long. But that's really probably my only complaint about the Odyssey, other than, yeah, I don't want to spoil this for anyone, but there is something very, very brutal that happens in this that wasn't my favourite, but the rest of it I did really enjoy. Yeah, I've really, really enjoyed my time with Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'm sorry that they're over, really. I definitely want to read more books about ancient Greece, and if you have any recommendations for me, please do leave them in the comments down below. Anything sort of adjacent to this, or retelling this, or about this even. I'm hoping to maybe read the Stephen Fry Mythos and Heroes books, and probably the Song of Achilles, which I've yet to read. But yeah, I definitely want to go on a bit of an ancient Greece kick off the back of these two. Great book. In my favourites of the month, we have my reread And Then There Were None. There's not much more to say about this because I have talked about this a lot and I love this book. I still think it's one of Agatha Christie's absolute finest, but in the reread it probably has moved down below Murder on the Orient Express in terms of my absolute favourites, with Five Little Pigs still at the top, but I haven't reread that yet. An absolutely fantastic book. Also in my favourites of the month, another reread, Anne of Green Gables. This one I actually didn't read most of this in the physical copy. I did read this physical copy last year, but this year I listened to it on Audible, and the audiobook was narrated by Rachel McAdams and it was absolutely fantastic. If anything, it added to my love of Anne of Green Gables, and I must say as well that being in the Anne-along with Emily at Novell Novels and Gemma at Read a Book Gem and a whole host of others reading the same book, it was just absolutely lovely and really added to this book for me as well. So this is still a firm favourite and was definitely one of my favourites of the month. A new favourite of the month that I hadn't read before was The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers by Jen Campbell. I did talk about this one extensively in my mid-month wrap-up, so I would recommend going and watching that about this book. But I absolutely loved the artwork, I absolutely loved the stories, and it's still a firm favourite of the month. Coming up to near the end now, we have The Unheard by Nikki French. It was definitely a favourite of the month, and if you want to see some more about this, I have done a standalone review of this book on its own, so please go and check that out if you'd like to know more about this book. I'll link it in the description down below. Yeah, this was a great book. I couldn't stop myself reading it. It was so gripping, and I highly, highly recommend it to lovers of psychological thrillers. And finally, there was only one book that could possibly top The Unheard by Nikki French, and that was an audiobook which I have been listening to now since Victober. And it's the audiobook of Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. I finished it in January and I absolutely loved it. I did have a little break from this book. I had a break to listen to other things, probably from around the end of November to December, and I went back to it this month and I just absolutely loved it. I fell in love with so many of the characters that Dickens has brought to life in this book. I loved the storyline. I just thought it was absolutely well worth the 36 hours of listening. The narrator, David Troughton, did an amazing job. He had different voices for every single character. He really brought the humour in Dickens to life, and he really brought the seriousness in Dickens to life as well. It was a fantastic book, and this book has absolutely something of everything. It has love stories, it has like hate stories, I suppose, like fallings out, it has murders, it has a bit of everything. It really, really does. I would say that this is now my favourite Dickens that I've read so far. although I do still have a huge fondness for Great Expectations and David Copperfield, which are still right up there. But Our Mutual Friend just had something else different, and this was my first Dickens I listened to on audiobook, and I would definitely not rule out listening to a classic on an audiobook again. It was great, it was a brilliant experience, but I would say if you are trying an audiobook of Dickens, it can be quite difficult to keep all the characters under control because there were loads of them, and I really enjoyed the fact that this month Dickens was really starting to wrap up all of the storylines with all of these many characters, and every single person that you meet in this book gets their own ending, gets their own wrap up, and I loved it. It's absolutely fantastic. Very, very varied book, and so many different storylines to follow, but well worth it. I may do a separate review on its own of this, talking about whether it's worth getting into Dickens and this book in particular, but yeah, for now I'll just say it was my absolute favourite of the month. So, we've come to the end of the books. I happily read 6 books from the Giant TBR this month, but I actually added 7 books to the TBR, but luckily I did read one of those. I added The Unheard and I read it immediately, so I have added 6 books to the Giant TBR, which I may make a short haul to show you. So the TBR number is actually staying the same this month, which is a bit disappointing, but at least it hasn't gone up. So we're still on 192 for the Giant TBR. No sign of movement downwards because the book buying ban definitely came unstuck this month. So more on that later. Do come back and check out the book haul and I'll tell you whether it was worth accidentally letting the TBR stay the same for the month. Oh well. So I really enjoyed my January reading. I really enjoyed pretty much all of the 16 books, and I hope you've had a lovely month of reading too. Please do let me know in the comments down below which of these books have you read and loved, and what books did you read and enjoy in January. If you've enjoyed this video today, I hope you'll give it a like. I hope you'll consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks for watching today. I'll see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.